Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And hey, we are leading into the holiday weekend. I hope everybody has an absolutely fantastic time. Spend some time with your family, friends, or whomever. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. As for today, though, it's going to be a little bit different than usual. Usually we talk about 4 to 5 topics a day, but Microsoft and Activision, they both dropped their official responses to the FTC's complaints. At first, I was going to try to cover the news as usual, but I started to kind of realize this topic is going to be quite extensive. These are very long responses by both Microsoft and Activision, and I mean, there's just so much to cover here. I believe the Microsoft document is like 34 pages long, and then Activision's, that's another 35 pages. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attempt to condense this as best as I possibly can. That way we can have a nice, concise video. I mean, technically, I could probably talk about both these documents for like an hour long, but what I try to do with these videos is give you the news in a concise manner, give my own takes on things, and then let you carry on with your day. It's news dose, not news overload. So what I'm going to do today is talk about what's happening with these responses, and then also we're going to talk a little bit about Nintendo's holiday event as well, because they did, yes, reveal their final 3 games, one of which is a game that I know a lot of fans are very, very much looking forward to. So do absolutely stay tuned for that. But yeah, let's just go and get right into these responses to the FTC. Now, what I did here is I highlighted specific parts of each response and titled them to what they're essentially trying to cover. So let's just go and start off with Microsoft, where they right away focus on Sony's refusal to the Call of Duty contract. As you can see here, they say Microsoft is buying Activision to try to become more competitive in this expanding global industry. Its vision for the transaction is simple. Xbox wants to grow its presence in mobile gaming, and 3/4 of Activision's gamers and more than 1/3 of its revenue comes from mobile offerings. Xbox also believes it is good business to make Activision's limited portfolio of popular games more accessible to consumers by putting them on more platforms and making them more affordable. That includes making Call of Duty, one of Activision's most popular games, more broadly available. Microsoft made this public pledge on the day the deal was announced. Since then, Microsoft has agreed to provide the game to Nintendo, which does not currently have it, and has offered to Sony. The acquisition of a single game by the third-place console manufacturer cannot upend a highly competitive industry. That is particularly so when the manufacturer has made it clear it will not withhold the game. The fact that Xbox's dominant competitor has thus far refused to accept Xbox's proposal does not justify blocking a transaction that will benefit consumers. Giving consumers high-quality content in more ways and at lower prices is what the antitrust laws are supposed to promote, not prevent. And yeah, that's a loaded comment, but I'd say it's also fairly logical. I mean, yes, on one side, they kind of call out the FTC here by saying, hey, you all aren't following the laws here. But then they also point out that while the FTC continues to focus on console gaming, this acquisition it's not just about that. Microsoft wants to make a push into mobile gaming, where it right now can be described as a bit of a duopoly, where basically Google and Apple rules that market. Whereas Microsoft, I mean, they're pretty much non-existent in that part of the industry. So the FTC has no merit to stop that, nor do they have the legal rights to stop a buyout based on a competitor refusing their offer to basically their biggest complaint. See, I think we kind of all knew that this was going to come back and bite the FTC and Sony. I mean, maybe they could have made an argument before about Call of Duty being eventually foreclosed and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, as soon as Microsoft offered that 10-year Call of Duty contract, I think that kind of laid the groundwork for this entire case. That is gold for them to use in court. And really, the FTC, they don't have a counter argument to this, because now they can't use Call of Duty against them in any argument that they make. Microsoft, under contractual obligations, was absolutely set to bring Call of Duty to more platforms, not less. I mean, again, if it was just them publicly committing to it, okay, then the FTC can maybe make an argument. But Microsoft, I mean, they wrote in a contract, so yeah, the FTC is going to have a hard time working around that. Continuing on, though, they lay the background to Game Pass accessibility and also different strategies. They say here that gamers also pay for games in different ways. They can buy individual games, today primarily by downloading them rather than purchasing cartridges or discs. They can subscribe to services that offer the ability to play a variety of games for a monthly fee. And they can turn to free-to-play games which may be funded by in-game advertising and in-game purchases, for example, of additional levels or of additional characters. So they're basically pointing out that $70 retail games are not the only way to play games. In fact, we already have various options, and Xbox Game Pass is just yet another option. If you want to go out and play free-to-play games, which, I mean, we've seen how successful these games have been with games like Fortnite, Apex Legends, so on and so forth, that is a very, very successful monetization model. If you want to go out and buy your $70 retail games, well, despite there being subscriptions in the market, guess what? Those $70 games are still highly, highly successful, and Sony has proven that. So the Game Pass subscription model is just yet another monetization option that gamers can use. There's a lot of different ways that you can monetize your games, but that's basically what they're trying to say here. One of their key arguments, though, is that Xbox is the underdog. As you can see here, they say Xbox's console lags well behind Sony's and Nintendo's. While Xbox publishes games for consoles and PCs, it has far fewer popular exclusive games than Sony and Nintendo, and Xbox has almost no presence in mobile gaming, which is the largest and fastest growing segment of gaming. Now, they also included a graph here, which I'll just go ahead and put on screen here, and I think that this graph pretty much speaks for itself. Xbox is far behind both Nintendo and PlayStation, and something else that they are doing here is that they are making it very clear that Nintendo is indeed a competitor, despite Sony trying to say otherwise. But in terms of both exclusivity and consoles units sold, as you can see, Xbox is quite a bit smaller. And that's actually one of their key strategies. They're really trying to hammer home, while yes, Microsoft is a dominant company in certain industries. There's no doubt about that, but that's not the case when it comes to console gaming, and most certainly not when it comes to mobile gaming, which they once again prioritize here. Now, another one of their key arguments, though, is more gamers, not less. That's where they say Microsoft is buying Activision to meet the billions of gamers who choose to play on mobile devices instead of a console or PC. And to learn how to make games that appeal to and engage them, Xbox also wants to make Activision's non-mobile games more broadly available. That's a part of that strategy, bringing games to more platforms. But continue on, they say one way is by continuing to distribute Activision's games everywhere they currently exist and expanding to additional platforms like Nintendo. More gamers, not less. They continue on by saying another is by adding new Activision console and PC games to Xbox's Game Pass subscription service on the day those new games are released, creating new ways to access those games. Activision has never before put its new games immediately in subscription. Now, I highlighted that remark for a reason, and that's because this is one of their key arguments going forward. Now, we're going to get into that more in a second because Activision did post their own response, and that theirs was a lot more feisty. It's something, all right. But, a lot more on that here in just a moment. But nonetheless, they are making it very clear here that, once again, this buyout is going to bring these games to more platforms, not less. Not only are they going to include these games on mobile devices, they want to expand into that field, but on top of that, yes, they made that contract with Nintendo. Of course, they were going to bring Call of Duty over there, and they had it written all out and all that good stuff. So more gamers, not less. I really don't know why we're still talking about Call of Duty by this point, to be quite honest. It's been pretty clear for a very, very long time that it's going to be multi-platform. It's ridiculous that we still see this argument pop up, but hey, it is what it is. Another thing that they wanted to do to just kind of set things clear here, though, is that they said Microsoft did not mislead the EU over Bethesda. This is where they said any suggestion that Microsoft's statements to the European Commission about ZeniMax were misleading is incorrect. Microsoft explicitly said it would honor Sony's existing exclusivity rights and approach exclusivity for future game titles on a case-by-case basis, which is exactly what it has done. The European Commission agrees it was not misled, stating publicly the day after the complaint that Microsoft did not make any commitments to the European Commission, nor did the European Commission rely on any statements made by Microsoft about the future distribution strategy concerning ZeniMax's games. Instead, the European Commission cleared the transaction unconditionally, as it concluded that the transaction would not raise competition concerns. And this is actually how I remember this as well. We talked about this before. Microsoft, they made it pretty clear through that acquisition that they couldn't talk about exclusivity until after the buyout was complete. I mean, yes, there were some word games throughout that buyout, but they did drop several hints where you could kind of read between the lines. They talked about planning to support ongoing games, aka The Elder Scrolls Online and Fallout 76. They also talked about honoring existing agreements, which they did in both Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, hence them releasing on PlayStation a year before coming over to Xbox. But something that they didn't do is they never made any promises other than that. And based on several hints they dropped, again, you had to read between the lines, but it seemed like most gamers were able to do this. They had every intention on making some of their future games, like Starfield, exclusive. I mean, I covered that story throughout the year, and it was pretty evident that they had every intention on making some of their games exclusive. I mean, yes, there was a few people out there that just refused to believe that that was the case, but it wasn't hard to see, so yeah. Anyways, though, another part that they say here is that there is differing game industry business strategies. This is where they say, lastly, the game subscription service and cloud gaming service Xbox offers are not different products. Now, this is something that the FTC wants to do. They want to separate Xbox Game Pass with their Xbox consoles. But Microsoft, they're saying, no, that's not what's happening here. They are one and the same. It's just different business strategies. That's where they say the services allow consumers to access games in different ways, whether by paying a low monthly price for a broad catalog of games or playing a game on a variety of devices without first downloading it. But the games themselves are identical. Xbox believes these alternative payment and distribution models may have promise in the future, but consumers will ultimately decide whether Xbox is correct. If they agree with Xbox's vision, that will simply prompt more competition, including from companies like Sony, which already has a successful subscription service without even including its most popular and exclusive games on the day they are released. Sony may prefer to protect the revenues it gets from more expensive individual game sales, but the antitrust laws do not serve to insulate the dominant market player and its favored business model from competition. So they're saying, hey, Sony not only has a successful subscription model already that they could improve even more, I've been saying this for a while, but instead Sony focuses on a different strategy in distributing their games, which, I mean, that's perfectly fine. That's kind of their point here. Of course, they sell their games at retail for $70, whereas Xbox, they instead focus on distributing their games in a different way by focusing on the Game Pass model. Microsoft is basically saying we shouldn't be punished for using a different strategy, and you shouldn't be just trying to protect the market leader simply because they prefer to do it a different way. The game industry is big, and there's several successful monetization options, as they pointed out earlier with something like free-to-play games. And the more options gamers have, not only can they choose what's best for themselves, but it also encourages competition because at the end of the day, and this is what this all kind of boils down to here, it's companies that needs to adapt to what consumers want to pay for. It, however, shouldn't be up to the company, or in this case, it shouldn't be up to Sony to dictate how billions of people choose to pay for their games. If they prefer the subscription model, then they absolutely can do that. But if they also want to pay for $70 games, well, they can do that as well. That is completely up to the consumers. And as we've already seen, both can be successful within the same industry. Neither one is dominant. So what Microsoft is saying is that more options are better, and then gamers, they should get to choose for themselves. And I think that that's actually an excellent point here. I think that's one of the best points made in this entire statement. I think that's actually a very, very good argument to make. Now, in their closing argument, though, they do go on to say this. Ultimately, the commission cannot meet its burden of showing that the transaction would leave consumers worse off because the transaction will allow consumers to play Activision's games on new platforms and access them in new and more affordable ways. The relief sought in the complaint should be denied. And yeah, I do agree with them here. Once again, consumers, they should absolutely be allowed to choose how they pay for their games. But really, this entire response, I'd say, was fairly even keel. Microsoft wasn't overly aggressive here, but rather they decided to focus on logic instead and just trying to smash the FTC's arguments, which, to be frank, I think they did a pretty good job at that. However, if you were hoping for a more aggressive approach, you want things to be just a little bit more spicy, well, we can actually go to Activision for that because they had their own response as well, and we'll go over some of the quotes they had here. yeah, they weren't as nice, to say the least. And that starts right away with their introductory statement where they said, "This merger will benefit gamers, employees, and competition globally, yet the FTC persists in its ideologically fueled effort to ignore settled law and what decades of experience tells us is good for competition. The FTC's theory rests on the entirely unfounded assumption that, after acquiring Activision, Microsoft's Xbox division, Xbox, will withhold or degrade other gaming platforms access to Call of Duty games, harming Xbox's competitors in 3 alleged relevant markets. Its theory fails on 3 principal grounds." So, yeah, right away, Activision goes in the offensive here and basically just calls out the FTC for what is very clear by this point, I would say. We've talked a lot about it on the channel already, but the FTC, under Lina's leadership, they have made it a mission to go after big tech mergers, regardless of the law. This is not an accusation by this point. It is an absolute fact. That is what they're doing, and it's exactly why they have lost in court several times under her leadership. It's actually ridiculous. Regardless of what you think about the Activision Blizzard case, what the FTC is doing, it's not okay, and people should be upset about this because it's an abuse of government power. So more or less, what Activision is doing here is that they're accusing the FTC of doing the same thing with this buyout. And right away, they might actually have a case with that, because from what we've already heard, the FTC didn't even sit down with Microsoft to see if they can work together. And I mean, Microsoft, they were willing to see if they could, figure out a solution. So, I mean, I think that right away made the FTC look absolutely terrible. And it just seemed like they had their mind pretty much set on what they want to do here. They want to make an example out of this acquisition just because it's a big tech merger. It's coming from Microsoft, out of all companies. Why is that again? Because, well, the FTC, they want to make a political point. Really, though, I'd kind of say that you can almost make an argument that they're more of a political embarrassment than anything else. One of the more amusing responses from Activision, though, was this. The FTC's wildest supposition is that Activision content would be available on subscription and cloud gaming services if not for the merger. The FTC alleges that the transaction would harm Xbox's competitors for multi-game subscription and game clouding services because Activision might otherwise one day make its content available for those companies. These allegations are not only factually speculative and conclusory, they are entirely divorced from the facts. Activision's aversion of multi-game subscriptions and cloud gaming is widely known in the industry and is supported by ample testimony and evidence in the investigative record in this case. The only plausible but-for scenario here is that Activision's new releases would not be available on subscription or cloud gaming services at all absent the transaction, meaning that Xbox's plans to bring Activision games to subscription and cloud can only be viewed as output enhancing and overwhelmingly pro-competitive. A theory premised on the notion that Xbox can withhold from its competitors something they never would have had access to in the first place reeks of desperation and is destined for failure. So yeah, Activision, they're not pulling any punches here, and they're saying, hey, we don't put our games like Call of Duty into these subscription services day one. We never have, and we certainly weren't planning to. Sony wasn't going to get any of that anyways, so that's not even an argument that you can make. Just look at our history. And they continue this argument in their closing statement, where they also said this. The FTC ignores the significant benefits of the transaction in favor of a warped attempt to ignore the facts and rewrite antitrust law and settled precedent to protect Xbox's competitors from hypothetical harm that has no basis in marketplace realities. Adding Activision's content to multi-game subscription and cloud gaming, where it would not have been available otherwise, is plainly output enhancing and gives gamers more options on how and where to engage with Activision content. Activision, and particularly its King division, will also enable the acceleration of Xbox's nearly non-existent mobile gaming business, which would enhance competition in the fastest growing segment of gaming. Again, we talked about this before. App on Google pretty much solely owns that side of the business, but nonetheless, continuing on, they say, and the transaction will ultimately expand the capital support and talent available to Activision's game development studios, driving further innovation in new games and technologies. The FTC's disregard for these benefits to consumers and focus on supposed harms to Xbox's deep-pocketed competitors Sony, in other words, betrays a fundamental disconnect between the FTC's theories and the antitrust law's underlying purpose, which is to protect competition, not competitors. The FTC is asking this court to protect the world's largest gaming companies, aka Sony, Nintendo, Google, and Apple, from further competition from Xbox, and thereby turning antitrust on its head. Blinded by ideological skepticism of high-value technology deals and by complaints from competitors, the FTC has not only lost sight of the realities of the intensely competitive gaming industry, but also the guiding principles of our nation's antitrust laws. So again, if you were wanting spicy statements, Activision, they gave you what you wanted here. They're calling it how it is, and I think a lot of gamers can respect that. Microsoft, they can play nice and everything. Sony, they can act like they're the victim and all of that. But Activision, they know their own business and how it works, and they're coming in like Mike Tyson here. They're throwing absolute haymakers here. They're saying that the FTC, they're just desperate to make a political point as they're trying to rewrite laws. And based on history, yeah, that's probably exactly what's happening here. Regardless, though, I mean, I think this case just got a whole lot more interesting. Activision, I think they pointed out a lot of very interesting things. They're saying, hey, we don't support subscriptions as is, and the only way that fans are going to get these into subscriptions is through this buyout, which is, good for consumers. Either way, though, that should be about it for their responses here. That was certainly a lot to go over, but we'll see if these responses are enough to shut the FTC's complaints down. That should about do it, though. I mean, that was a lot to cover, but let me know what you all think about all this in the comments below. Did you like what Microsoft had to say? And what did you think about Activision being, a little aggressive? What did you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Now, we do also have some Nintendo news as well. I know this video has been relatively long by this point, but they did continue their holiday event today, where they revealed 4 more game updates, and as we head into the holiday weekend, I thought you all might want to know about some of these games. One, I'd say in particular, I'll get to that here in just a second, but the first game they revealed was Dust and Neon. This is a roguelike twin-stick shooter set in a futuristic Wild Wild West. I think if you like twin-stick shooters, this actually looks pretty decent. I do like the art style and everything, and it being a roguelike in particular, which, I mean, it seems to be a growing subgenre right now, but getting access to new loot on the run and, with it being a roguelike and everything, this could be a fun overall time. Dust and Neon, though, will be out early 2023. Then next up, they announced Undying, which looks like a kind of interesting, almost narrative-driven style of game. This is an emotional survival game where a mother has been bitten and affected by a zombie. Still, though, her being a loving mother and everything, she fights to survive, not for herself, but instead to protect her child. The premise on paper actually sounds great, and something that's also easy to relate to. This could end up being an emotional ride and just a very good narrative-driven style of game. This game, though, has been available through early access on Steam for over a year now, so do just kind of keep that in mind. If you want to check this game out on Steam right now, just go ahead and search up Undying, but otherwise, its full release on the Switch is set for spring of 2023. They also gave us an update for one of my own personal most anticipated independent games for 2023, being Sea of Stars. Now, I think this game looks just fantastic. This game is inspired by the legendary Chrono Trigger. I know a lot of fans have been wanting the return for that franchise for a long time, but instead here we do have Sea of Stars, and it is coming from the same studio that brought us The Messenger. Now, that game was great in its own right, so I mean, here you have a studio with a good reputation, and this game, again, it looks amazing. And I think Nintendo, they obviously know that. They know this game looks like it could be special, and that's exactly why they've shown this game several times, including today. Despite this not necessarily being a major update, they went ahead and talked about its composer here, which is Yasunori Matsuda. He's worked on a lot of beloved games, including, yes, Chrono Trigger. So that's pretty cool to see, but it did get some new gameplay as well, which continues to look absolutely amazing. Still no exact release date, though. All we know currently is that it is coming in 2023. As for this last game, and we already speculated that this was going to be the big announcement for the week, and it very much was, because Sports Story, in fact, did get an updated gameplay trailer with a release date. This is coming from the same studio who worked on Golf Story, which fans, I mean, they adore that game. And well, guess what? Not only did they give us an updated trailer, but on top of that, yes, you can actually go out and download this one right now on the Nintendo eShop. For that matter, there's also a major indie sale on the eShop, so you might as well just go and turn on your Switch to see if anything interests you. Unfortunately, though, I know there was some hope for this one, but yeah, there's still no release date for Hollow Knight Silksong. I mean, I guess we'll just have to kind of hope to see it at the next showcase. Eventually, right? Nonetheless, though, I know this video has been pretty long by this point, so I'm just going to go and let you all go here. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. Be safe out there, everybody. But as always, though, if you enjoyed the video, go and make sure to hit that bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.